Hello and welcome to the final week of the Loft's virtual Wordplay. My name is Deb Olin and I am the Individual Giving Director at the Loft. We're so glad you're here. We hope that during the challenges of COVID-19 that this little corner has been a place of respite and creative inspiration for you. As you may know, when we began planning Wordplay, our intention was to have 100 authors and 10,000 visitors celebrating books in downtown East Minneapolis. Well, with a quick and thoughtful pivot, we have loved the opportunity to engage with you at home, bringing you conversations with today's top authors on conversation topics across the spectrum. Because you have shown up for us, we've reached over 40,000 viewers across the country. We are so grateful to provide all of our Wordplay sessions to you free of charge, and that is due in large part thanks to the forward-thinking generosity and leadership of our sponsors, and especially our founding partners, St. Catherine University and Star Tribune. We would not be here without them. And while their support has gotten us this far, we turn to you, our dear virtual audience members, to bring us to the finish line. This week, as Minnesota raises funds as part of hashtag GiveAtHomeMN, and as we celebrate hashtag Giving Tuesday Now across the U.S., we ask you to please consider including the Loft in your giving plans. Your gift of any size allows readers and writers to continue to receive support through classes, fellowships, events, challenging conversations, and more, all at the Loft. And your donation will automatically make you one of our fantastic members. We hope you will support us as we support the literary community. Thank you for all you do for the Loft, and enjoy Wordplay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this Wordplay session. I'm Deb Olin. I work at the Loft. And in this session, the Loft is proud to partner with the Virginia Festival of the Book to host Deb Olin Unferth and VanderMeer in conversation with short fiction writer Amanda Korman. And before I hand it over to Amanda, I just want to take a moment to thank our presenting sponsors, St. Catherine University and Star Tribune. Thank you so much. You guys are making Wordplay possible, and we couldn't have done it without you. Wordplay is just one of many programs that the Loft offers year-round. We offer everything from classes to fellowships, smaller events, a writers' conference, and more. You can check us out at loft.org for more information. Everything that the Loft does is made possible in part by the generosity of our wonderful members whose support sustains us and our arts programming year-round. And if you're not a Loft member, today is actually the absolute most perfect day to become one, because across the country it is hashtag Giving Tuesday Now today. So nonprofits all over the country are raising funds as a result of the pandemic. And if you have enjoyed Wordplay and would like to help our community of readers and writers, please consider making a gift today. And you'll become one of our wonderful members. That comes with lots of fun goodies like reading recommendations, writing prompts, and more. And you make our hearts feel warm and gooey, just like a chocolate chip cookie. So what better thing could you be doing for the Loft today? So you can do that by going and clicking the button below that says Support Wordplay. And that's also where you can buy a copy of our authors' books directly from the Loft's online bookstore. And if you're also watching from somewhere that's not our crowdcast, there's a link on the event page at loft.org. Okay, so the last thing I want to mention is that we have a Q&A at the end. So anytime throughout the conversation that you're hearing, feel free to add a question to the Ask a Question section or in the comments section, and we'll get to those at the end of the conversation. Okay, so it's my pleasure to hand it over to Amanda.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Amanda Korman, and I'm a writer in Charlottesville, Virginia, and I'm the moderator of today's event featuring Deb Olin Unferth and VanderMeer. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for this conversation, and particularly to the Festival of the Book in Virginia and the Loft Wordplay for bringing us all together across the space-time continuum today. If you are intrigued by our conversation today, I hope you will consider getting your own copy of Deb's and Jeff's fantastic books, Barn 8 and Dead Astronauts. There is a blue button at the bottom of your screen that will take you to a link to purchase the book today. So the three of us are going to chat for about a half an hour, and then we will be taking those questions from the audience. So I welcome you. I exhort you to use the comment section in whatever platform you're using to ask your question of Jeff and Deb, and they will be able to get to that towards the end. So let's begin with some introductions of our authors. First, I am pleased to welcome Deb Olin Unferth. Deb is the author of 6 books, including Wait Till You See Me Dance and Barn 8. She has received a Guggenheim Fellowship and 3 Pushcart Prizes, and was a National Book Critics Circle Award finalist. Her work has appeared in Granta, Harper's Magazine, McSweeney's, and the Paris Review. The Guardian describes Deb's new novel, Barn 8, as strange and brilliant, a caper story about a motley crew of lovable criminals banding together to pull off the biggest heist of their careers, to free 900,000 battery hens in Iowa. The New York Times describes Barn 8 as a beautiful, urgent, politically charged book with a huge heart. And while the plot is sometimes madcap, well, so is love. Welcome, Deb. I'm also pleased to introduce you to Jeff VanderMeer. Jeff is an award-winning novelist and editor. His fiction has been translated into 20 languages and has appeared in the Library of America's American Fantastic Tales and multiple years' best anthologies. Jeff writes nonfiction for the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, and the Guardian, among others, and is the author of Dead Astronauts, Born, and the Southern Reach trilogy, Annihilation, Authority, and Acceptance. Jeff's new novel, Dead Astronauts, was named one of Esquire magazine's best books of the year and is described by The Guardian as a genuinely innovative artwork that begins as a quest narrative, a fantastical variant of the classic Western, then begins to shed its archetypes, fragmenting into a series of variously interconnected accounts from different narrators. Kirkus Reviews said of Jeff and of Dead Astronauts, VanderMeer is a master of literary science fiction, and this may be his best book yet. Welcome, Jeff VanderMeer.
Thanks.
So let's kick it off by beginning today's discussion by situating us. Here we are on Zoom in a pandemic. Both of your books imagine ways that the world might change radically, and here we are in a radically changed world over the past few months. So I really wanted to start by just asking you both, A, how are you? How are you? Let's check in. It's a pandemic. And second, really, how have you been looking at your book anew in light of all the ways that the world has just changed so suddenly? So Deb, I'd like to invite you to start.
Well, I mean, I guess I'm doing okay. I guess I'm, we were just talking before we came on how strange Zoom is and how, what a big adjustment it's been for all of us, especially with my students. Now they can just disappear. And I mean, it's very weird when they disappear. So my book, yeah, I am really thinking about my book differently. My book has a lot of moments where we spin into the future. And even early in the book, there's a moment at the end of civilization when people are living very separated, and the fans have taken over the sound of the earth because people can't use air conditioning anymore. So there's just these giant fans. It's the only sound left on the earth. And nobody's talking. Everyone's just arguing with people on their screens. And it feels ominous and strange now. I mean, at the time when I wrote it, it felt so funny and amusing, but now it feels, like it could be a portent of the future. And then there's other moments in the book where I go far into the future that feel just a little more real now. And the work I'm doing now, I had started before the pandemic began, and now as I'm working on it, most of it's sci-fi, and it doesn't seem that extreme anymore. So I'm going to have to go back in and rework it. Now it just feels like, oh yeah, of course that's what life is going to be like. So.
Thank you, Deb. Jeff, how about you?
Well, we're fortunate in the sense that we moved to this new house on a wooded ravine that's still very urban. We're like 10 minutes from Tallahassee City Center, but it's this kind of amazing arc of wildlife. And so, on the one hand, there's the surrealness of it's extremely stressful thinking about the stupidity of government responses and the partisanship of responses. And then I step outside into the yard, and that's definitely stress relief. But at the same time, it feels even more urgent because of the circumstances and not knowing what the long term holds. So I would say I'm probably drinking more than I usually do at the same time that I'm doing more yard work than I normally do. So hopefully it balances out. I'm much more afraid of my own hair now than I was 4 weeks ago, as it seems to have a life of its own. I'm much more dubious about the neighbors because I just can't take the idea of not going out with a mask, not keeping the proper distancing. So I feel like it's made me, as it has for a lot of people, more paranoid, but also more paranoid about myself because we have these built-in polite responses to situations. So you're out at your mailbox and your neighbor walks by, and you momentarily forget you're supposed to be keeping 6 feet of distance, right? Because you go into the normal routines and rituals. So you really have to watch yourself quite a bit just in your everyday routine. I think it's a pretty standard response. We're lucky enough that we can work from home, that we do work from home. So I feel very privileged and fortunate about that. And then in terms of the fiction, I always try very hard to work from a distance and a perspective where things reflect the current day, but they're not topical in the sense of becoming dated easily. I believe very strongly in finding that stance, in part because it also allows you to find the right emotional distance from a subject to be able to write about it. So Dead Astronauts, for example, is definitely, it feels like this fits into it. It's a compartment of it. It's just not mentioned in the book because the book is about ecological devastation, about climate crisis, and the coronavirus is in part of the climate crisis, just simply making visible, even though ironically it's invisible, which is causing some problems on the political level to some extent. But it's making manifest to people who have not maybe been affected by climate crisis, in addition to those who have, of the things that are coming. And Dead Astronauts is all about that. And the distance in Dead Astronauts, where you have this kind of ragtag team of rebels fighting this faceless company and trying to bring back some sort of life to Earth across these different parallel Earths. It feels again like this is a hidden chapter of that, because the book and most of my books are all about the things we can't see and the contamination, both good and bad, and the negotiations that are going on between our bodies and the world every day. So in that sense, it seems part and parcel. I will say that this adds additional burden to my 10 seconds into the future thriller that I'm working on now, where I already had to deal with how to not mention the T word, and now I have to, eventually go back and figure out where this fits in or doesn't. So,
thank you, Jeff. Thank you both for those. I want to pick up on that thread about life and the way that both of your novels treat, especially non-human life. I appreciate the two festivals bringing you both together. I think it's a wonderful, really rich, conversation intersection between your two books, because I was really moved by the way in both of your books, obviously each in your own way, you made the sanctity of non-human life, you really made it felt. Jeff, obviously in your book, I'm thinking of, it's the care, it's the affection, it's the concern with which you write about the biotech experiments, as well as the kind of animal plant essence of a lot of the main characters. And Deb, in your book, of course, it's the chickens, but Block in particular has a place in my heart now. Across the board, both of you really brought immense literary dignity to these life forms. And so I just wanted to ask both of you, and I'll start with Jeff this time, just what are the challenges and the rewards and the joys of selecting and then writing about these different animal plant characters?
Well, first of all, I totally agree with you that the two books are sympathetic and kind of fit together, in that they're talking about two aspects of a similar problem. And I think that the value of seeing it that way is twofold. It may be that the policy decisions that need to be made with regard to like factory farming and poultry and whatnot are different than the policy decisions to be made with regard to wild spaces, but they intersect in how factory farming affects nature and wilderness. And it's also the same question with regard to animal ethics, more or less, and how we treat and perceive animals. I would say that for me, I always have to have some kind of human intervention in the animal character that I'm creating, because that feels like the in for me as a human being to be able to write it. So I often joke that if I was really writing from a fox's perspective, like I do in Dead Astronauts, it would be a 500 to 1,000 page novel of just smells, because that's how foxes communicate. And then we as humans would have to try to interpret what the plot of that was. So in the novel, the fox has been kind of altered to become kind of a astronaut that this company uses in its experiments across different versions of Earth, seeking different places to exploit. And that creates a space too where the fox can itself comment, sometimes sympathetically, sometimes sardonically and sarcastically, about human perception of foxes through myth and everything else. And so, you know, it allows the fox to be both real and not human, but also to make a connection to the human that I think is useful. And I keep trying to push that boundary. I mean, I've had novels where I've tried to describe senses that are not our five senses. I believe firmly in Angela Carter's dictum that your reach should always exceed your grasp. And so when you deal with this subject, you know that you're failing. You're always going to fail in some way, but by pushing farther, you may get somewhere different. And you may, by inhabiting a character that people can find some interest or common ground in, change their minds even just a little bit about how they perceive the world around them, including animals.
I appreciate that so much. Jeff, Deb.
That is so interesting. Yeah, I mean, it was really a challenge for me to think about writing from the point of view of an animal, or how to write about animals at all. I think that my view of animals differs so much from just about everybody I know, except for extremists, that or what people consider to be extremists, that I was afraid to write about it at all, because I thought people would just, you know, find it sanctimonious or annoying. But I mean, you know, I mean, I happen to feel that animals, we don't have the right to own animals and use them and kill them at our will. They're not ours. And so I just really wanted to explore that. And I feel like the biggest problem was that I didn't want to be cartoonish. I didn't want to be anthropomorphizing. I didn't want to be in any way belittling them and make it cute at all. And so, and plus, like, I haven't even really spent that much time around chickens, or I hadn't before I started writing the book. So I don't even really know what chickens are like. So I had to do a tremendous amount of research. So I read a lot of books about chickens, and I spent a lot of time with chickens. At the time, I was living in Michigan when I was writing those parts. And there was a sanctuary nearby that had 100 rescued chickens. So, and they gave me permission to just come anytime I wanted. So I would just go and just sit there and just listen to them and watch them and record them. And then I would listen to them at night on headphones to try to just be like, what are you talking about? Like, what are you, you know, why are you communicating so much? Like, they just never shut up. And just, so I tried to really get into their heads, and then I tried to really get out of their heads and just get on the page what, not my interpretation of what they were doing, but just as much as I could see. And so, yeah, I came up with Block, who is one of the characters in the book, but, you know, Block is only a few pages in the book because I had to cut out so many pages because they just seemed ridiculous. And I wound up only with just like maybe 5 or 6 pages total in the book that represent Block. But I felt like it was so important because to try to get her in there, because I really wanted to have the idea that she's her own person and that she's different from other chickens, that chickens can be different from one another, and that, just as the rest of us are. And I also feel like there are so many similarities between their history and our history. I mean, we also were once nomadic and, traveling and in small groups and taking care of our children in communities and just as they do in the wild. And we too now live in these cages or boxes or houses, and we cut off pieces of our bodies and just as the chickens on the farms have to endure. And we too have been stunted in so many ways, and even as other parts of us grow. And in the book, I tried to represent that part by having some of them towards the end be super chickens as a result of the various kinds of inbreeding that they've suffered through. And so I was just trying to sort of draw those parallels and try to help us see our own civilization in some way abused in the same way, even as we are abusing.
Thank you so much, Deb. Yes, I have to say that one of the concept that chickens, that they speak to one another and that they have a kind of future tense that I learned in your book was incredible. So I think I just want to follow up with both of you about this, because it's really, in Deb's book, it's the chicken, you really capture that chicken essence, and so and in Jeff's book, you've got, it's the fox, the blue fox is obviously an anchor there, but there's also the duck and moss, so I kind of want to bring in that plant aspect too. That how did you both, why these animals of all possible animals to get into the heads of, or to try to, sorry, Deb, yeah.
Yeah, well, chickens, the most domesticated, abused animal on the planet. I felt like it made a lot of sense to do chickens because, it's so absurd. They're birds, they should, when you think of a bird, you think of it, you think of the symbol of freedom, right? It's going to fly across the sky and, free bird. We just have so many cliches associated with birds being free and representing freedom. And then here we have them trapped in these cages, and it's like so that they have the space that they can live on is about the size of this piece of paper. And it's so heartbreaking. And nobody likes that. Nobody. No, even farmers don't like that. Farming used to be very different, and it wasn't even that long ago. And so if you talk to them, they'll even say, well, it's not that we want it this way. And so I felt like that would be something. And plus, chickens are kind of funny. People find them a little ridiculous. I don't, but people do. And so it just felt like it had tragedy, it had humor, it had, parallels with who we are. It had, also chickens are birds, but they're also kind of not birds in a way because they don't really fly very much. So they're these sort of awkward, fat, weird things. And so they just had so much potential as great characters in the book, or just like a great kind of thing to be working with and moving around. And although, I really could have done anything. And at one point I was on an airplane I just accidentally was sitting next to this journalist, and we started talking, and she was kind of a famous journalist, and I was a little bit cowed. And she said, I was telling her about the book, and she said, why chickens? Nobody cares about chickens. You should do turkeys. So for a while I was like, maybe I should do turkeys. But then I was like, no way, man, I'm doing chickens.
I'm glad you did. Thank you, Deb. Yeah, Jeff.
I think that for me, Dead Astronauts is not in any way a sequel or prequel to other books in what's called the Bourne universe, but some of these were pre-existing characters who had very much puzzled me because they were like side characters, but I felt like they had their own stories. And I feel that way about a lot of fiction where I feel like there's non-human life in the backdrops of scenes that I feel are missed opportunities to some degree. And so I thought, well, there's this giant fish, this Leviathan, that's like a guardian for the company. Where did that come from? What was this being's life? And so sometimes you're just kind of trying to inhabit that and figure out, what this individual character, who happens to be an animal, is like. And then it also depends on what we bring in as humans. So for example, if I say the word fox, we have a lot more associations, I think, than if I say black blue-throated warbler, which is something that just flew by right now. So that creates other opportunities. That creates things that are already there. It's almost like the fact that I have to deal with, in a negative way, if I bring the Trump word into my novel, that brings all these associations in. Well, if you bring in the word fox, depending on your background, all this mythological stuff, all of these received ideas. And so that's a fertile ground and has to be considered as part of the character. So that also did determine, which viewpoints I inhabited, because then you need contrast, not just contrast of style or tone, but a purpose, intent, and again, the individual character. So the fox was the one that was going to carry the most human assumptions about it. And the Leviathan was going to be like the most pure itself moment. And then Moss is somewhere in between, because she's literally created out of a hybrid of moss and human. And she's actually her own portal into different realities. So there's a lot of stuff there that I've learned very, very, that the best way to convey some character detail is to not go into the reasons why. Like if a novelist spends three pages trying to explain something, they're probably going to fail at convincing you. And it's also a tell that they don't believe in the thing they're trying to sell you. So there's that as well. The least believable thing is the thing you explain the least as well. But I think I just feel like it's important for me too as a novelist, because it makes me have to push myself in terms of technique and craft. And that makes me push the art as well. And so a lot of the Dead Astronauts contrast comes not just from using first, second, and third person as appropriate to different kinds of characters, animal characters, but also different levels of poetic intensity. I started out as a poet and learned all those formal rules and conventions. And so I very much pulled on all of that to differentiate between the characters and get inside their heads.
Thank you, Jeff. So we've talked about some of the protagonists of these novels. I also wanted to ask about the bad stuff, the enemies, right? That both books feature a company and minions that produce this mechanized, routinized abuse and slaughter. In Barn 8, it's the Happy Green Family Farm. In Dead Astronauts, it's the company and Charlie X. These entities are clearly the enemy, and yet that's not all they are, and that's not, you don't leave it at that. So I wanted to ask both of you just what ended up surprising you about depicting these people and these systems that are in charge of such evil outcomes. We could maybe start with Jeff.
Well, it's funny because it's actually a writer from around Wordplay's parts, Carolyn Bly, whose writing book, The Passionate Accurate Story, first made me think of how to approach this. And she said that a lot of times when you're writing about things that you disagree with, you don't inhabit the interiority correctly. And so Charlie X is the example of, here's somebody who's wreaking all kinds of terrible things upon the world, but it's still important for understanding. And then also in the real world, it's important for, like, how do you combat it? To have an understanding of where that person is coming from. So I also had the constraint of the company, which is to say, I really felt strongly that like 20 years ago, I would have named the company and it would have been much more specific. But I feel like the stage we're at is that people and corporations run on these tracks where, for whatever reason, it is that generic. It's just simply, this is the way we do things, and there's not a lot of thought put into it. And when there is, it's from this perspective of greed and capitalism that just has run away from us. And so I thought, well, it's not broad, you know, is it too broad? Is it not subtle enough? No, because that's literally what's happening right now. But needing specificity as well, that's where Charlie X and his kind of tortured past comes in, which is not an excuse in any way, because a lot of the characters have very tortured pasts, and it doesn't affect their view of the world or how they affect the world. But that is my feeling right now, is that it's reached this kind of seamless, weird point where we as individual human beings have to push so hard just for logical, non-poisonous results. And also there's the issue of fighting something like that, which is so multi-tentacled and has so many moving parts that it's hard to see what the center is to strike at. And so I think that's also why I left it as the company, because most people, it's hard to know where to start. I mean, it's easier when you think of local activism, and what you can do for, like, you know, fighting over a particular, like, you know, don't cut the trees here or something that, you know, some company wants to do for some reason. But it's harder on a more strategic level. And so I wanted to grapple with that and grapple at how even things like failure, the way that we measure success is so much the metrics of the enemy, that we sometimes get very depressed over failures that actually at least push things in the right direction. And so a lot of times the dead astronauts in the novel are failing, but they're still succeeding in some way. And I wanted to make that visible.
Thank you.
That's so great. Yeah, the books do fit really interestingly together. It's so neat. You know, I teach at a prison in South Texas, and they just love your work, by the way. I didn't get a chance to tell you that beforehand, and I feel like it's because of those kinds of details. So what I would say is that, yeah, I did name the company. It's the Happy Green Family Farm, because as I was researching the egg industry, it was so amusing to me how they did have these ridiculous names like Happy this or you know, the Loving that or whatever, and they always insisted that they were a family farm, and because they really were a family farm. A lot of these farms had been held through generations, and had started very small with just like someone's, you know, grandfather, you know, before World War II had some, you know, little one tiny barn or something with 300 chickens, and now they have 20 million chickens or something. But for me the surprise was, so I did a lot of research on the egg industry, and I visited. Is it getting really dark in here? Because there's about to be a storm. I'm just wondering, am I getting sort of darker and darker? So there was a, so I visited 1.5 really industry factory farms, and went into the barns. The thing that really shocked me was that the farmers, I really liked them. And that was the thing that really changed my mind about how to write the book, because originally I had this just image of the farmers as these evil people who just hated chickens. And as I actually got to know them, it didn't turn out to be that way at all. I mean, they were as much a prison of the system that they had been, that they were in, as maybe not as the chickens were, but that a lot of us are in our different ways, you know, with our marriage to these companies, our just forced marriage to these companies. And so I really tried to write that into the book. I tried to make the farmers very human. I tried to show what they were going through and their own kind of difficulties in extricating themselves from the farming system. And I tried to do it with a little bit of a sense of humor, like, you know, one of them winds up quitting and opening a little bicycle shop. And so, but I mean, I guess I feel like there isn't, I don't really see any other way unless we all decide that we're just gonna do things differently, because unless each individual decides on their own that we're gonna do things differently, because these giant companies touch every single aspect of our lives. I mean, from the eggs that we eat to everything on this table. Even this table is touched by one of these giant companies, and our conversation right now, everything, it touches so much of our lives. I mean, we would have to just upend the entire system. So I don't really see much of a solution.
Thank you, Deb. And I think that points me to, I see our time is getting towards the end, but I wanted to mention it because one other quality of both your novels shared is, I mean, they're social critiques. They're really warnings, but at the same time, they're also really praise songs for friendship and love between people. And I just want our listeners to know that too, you know, that the bond between the protagonists in Dead Astronauts is gorgeous, right? And the bond between the protagonists and the ways that people fall in love and the ways the auditors show up for each other in Deb's book is heartwarming. And so I think if you could both just briefly touch on, in your book, but we're talking about wider, you know, the wide issues that you're touching on, just how do you see human love and friendship relating to all these, to saving the world? If you don't mind, Jeff.
Well, it's not as remarked upon as I wish it would be, but love is usually somewhere near the heart of everything that I write. It's just that because there's all the other stuff that is, I think it doesn't really get much attention. But for me, like in Dead Astronauts, it was really important that, you know, part of the fight is to not let it corrupt your relationships, not let it corrupt the things that in the moment you control. And, you know, part of not becoming cynical is still trusting people and still loving people. And at the end of the day, it's the thing they can't take away from you.
Thank you, Jeff. Deb?
I mean, I guess that I would say that the thing that I really wanted to get across is how connected we all are, how everything is, I mean, which I guess that this pandemic is showing us in a slightly uglier way. You know, that not only are we connected, we aren't just made up of our individual tiny families of our nuclear, you know, partner and kids and grandparents and, you know, slightly wider community of cousins and things like that we are. And not only are we connected to, you know, the people in China, but, you know, we're also connected to all of these chickens, you know, who are our sisters, who are in these things, and how we're connected to even the moss, you know, in Jeff's book, you know, the human and the moss coming together is just so beautiful to me. And it's so, indicative of how I feel that we are. And I tried to really express that in the book, that I even have like that, we're even connect, even the air is pushing us toward our fate and what's coming. And love is, of course, the positive way of us binding ourselves together.
Thank you both so much. We definitely want to bring in the audience questions right now. I just want to give a virtual round of applause to you both and just appreciate your wisdom so much, and hand it over to Caitlin.
Yay! This conversation has been so great to listen to. Thank you so much. We have a few questions here, and the one with the most upvotes is for Jeff. This is from Ian. He says, I'm a big fan of Southern Reach Trilogy and Alex Garland's film. What is the next film or TV adaptation of your work?
Well, actually, Dead Astronauts, Born, and Strange Bird, which are all in the same universe, has been optioned by AMC. And unlike with Annihilation, I'm going to have a really hands-on approach, and I'm a creative consultant on the project. I won't be the showrunner, but I'm really thrilled with the people that they're talking to. I'm really thrilled with AMC. I'm really thrilled that the AMC team I talked to was all women. I think that actually makes a huge difference for this universe. And so that's probably the next thing, but there's also a few other things percolating. And Hummingbird Salamander, the novel I'm working on now, has been optioned by Netflix. So we'll see what happens first.
Wow, congratulations. Sounds like you're staying busy.
Oh, thanks.
All right, we have a question for Deb. This is from Kyle. He says, you've written across so many prose forms, short stories, novels, memoir, and a graphic novel. Do you feel 6 books in that you are naturally drawn to a certain medium, or does each project demand its own form? And then how do you tell what project gets what form?
I think I just like form. I think I'm just interested in form. So, I thought it would be really fun and interesting and weird to try a graphic novel and, read a million graphic novels and just kind of figure out what they do and what do I have to add to it that's a little different. Or, same thing with the memoir. And certainly with the novel, I mean, I feel like the novel is just such a crazy, fantastic form. And I love trying to see what variation on it I can do that's different, as long as I'm trying to do something different with the form. That's the thing that's important to me. So yeah, I mean at the moment, there are a lot of things I haven't done, and I'm not sure which one I'm going to really settle on at the moment. I'm kind of just doing some sci-fi stuff, some weird little stories that might come together to be something. But I'd love to do something that includes audio, visual a little bit, and I don't know exactly what that's going to be.
Very cool. I love the idea of multimedia. That's a great next place to go. All right, let's see. So another question for Jeff. How is the restoration of your ravine influencing your writing, or is your writing influencing your ravine restoration?
Well, first of all, I'm really thrilled that me suddenly switching from book recommendations to 24/7 nature photos on Twitter didn't lose me millions of followers. I actually have, I think, 20,000 followers more than when I started. And I'm very grateful for that, because it must have been quite some people must have gotten the bends from that real fast. I think it is influencing the fiction, and I have one story that's going in my collection from FSG down the road called Landscraper, which is about the first person we had. It's not really about, but it starts out that way, where there's someone who's just down in the ravine, just like doing stuff like gardening, and the person who owns the house has no idea why. And it just goes out from there until towards the end, the narrator is actually hiding out in a burrow with an armadillo and a rabbit. So there's that, but there's also the ways in which it advances certain things in Dead Astronauts, which I wrote part of while I was here, which is to say, I'm learning here in part because of the nature of the house, which has so many windows, and therefore the inside and the outside are kind of like the same thing. I'm learning so many individual animals of various species and differentiating like this cardinal from that cardinal, from that cardinal, from that cardinal. I keep saying that cardinal about 50 times because there's that many cardinals in the yard. But the daily interactions with the wildlife, the bunny that's wary as opposed to the bunny that I worry about because he walks right up to me and he's a wild rabbit. What is wrong with you? So that kind of thing is definitely very influential and will definitely be in the fiction. But then there's also just the knowledge gained of native plants. I feel so bad that I knew so little about Florida plants until 2 years ago. And all of that adds other layers to like how you even write scenes and what the layering's like and the materials you have to choose from, so to speak. So I definitely will.
Very cool. Thank you. Okay, we have another question for Deb. So this is from John. He says, reading Barn 8, there was such vivid detail about what egg farms look like and smell like and especially sound like that it was obvious you spent a lot of time there. And I see in the acknowledgements that several egg farmers gave you tours, and you mentioned that obviously during your talk. Were any of them furious, or how did they respond when they saw the finished book?
Good question.
I mean, the thing that they were really mad about was I wrote a piece for Harper's that was like, it was like expose of the egg industry. That was the thing that really bummed them out. But they kind of knew, well, when I first started researching it, I'm not a journalist, so I didn't really understand that I was supposed to tell them what I was doing. I just thought, I went to an egg conference and I told the people that I was with food service. And that's how I initially started meeting the farmers. But then when Harper's gave me the assignment, then I had to tell them, no, really, I'm with Harper's. And that was when they really got mad. But then they were kind of in this corner because they had already said that I could come to their farms. And yet now I was going to be writing this article that could make them look really bad. So, I mean, fortunately, by that time I liked them and I tried not to be too harsh on them. But on the other hand, I think it's a terrible industry. So, yeah, they were bummed. They were definitely bummed. And they all unfriended me on various social media platforms, and they all stopped speaking to me. So I don't know. I hope that some of them read the book and wind up just enjoying it.
Wow, that's really intense. Yeah, wow. Okay, let's see. I'm just bouncing back and forth. So let's go back to Jeff. Let's see. Jeff, this is from Emilio. He says, I must say my favorite short story of yours is This World is Full of Monsters. I'd like to believe part of its dreamy structure and themes are influenced by beliefs such as pantheism. Is there any validity to this, or was there another inspiration?
I always thought of This World, I can't even remember the title now, This World ... Monsters, which you can find online for free right now. Was like the thematic conclusion to the Southern Reach trilogy, like what happens after acceptance, except in an alternate reality, because this guy like wakes up 100 years later and the whole world's been transformed by this kind of spore-based alien invasion. It's completely unrecognizable. But I think I grew up with a mother who was Buddhist and who got various degrees in various aspects of Indian folk art, was well-versed in Hinduism. And I definitely think that all of that combined with the fact that we lived in Fiji, they were in the Peace Corps, and then instead of taking raises, they took travel vouchers. So we spent like 9 months coming back around the world when I was 9. I think you get exposed to a lot of different perspectives and belief systems. And I've always been fairly agnostic/atheist, but I do think that a lot of that gets into the fiction by osmosis, because that was just my childhood.
Very interesting. All right, well, I think that's all the time we have for questions. Thank you both to Deb and Jeff for being our wonderful speakers, and to our wonderful moderator, Amanda. This has been so interesting. And I do just want to also remind you all at that button below, you can buy the books directly from the Loft's bookstore. Thank you again to our partners in this, the Virginia Festival of the Book, as well as our sponsors, St. Catherine University and Star Tribune. And of course, thank you to our members. We had 3 new members come in during this chat. So thank you to John, Tammy, and Cordelia. Like I said, you are making our hearts smushy and gooey, just like chocolate chip cookies. And I hope that if you enjoyed this conversation, that you will also consider supporting the Loft. Yeah, thanks again to all of you. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.